And as Lindsay and Rob were just saying, the issue of diversity has been a central one in terms of the code and in terms of sort of dialogue more generally for the past year or so. And I think so much progress has been made in the sector over recent years, but I don't think anyone would argue that there isn't still a job of work ahead in order to ensure fair and equal or equitable representation in the leadership of organisations, and in terms of harnessing the benefits that diversity brings. And in his message earlier, Phil mentioned the brilliant work that Perrett Laver have been doing to create a pool of board-ready candidates for the sector with the aim of improving the diversity in the leadership of sports organisations. And it's fantastic to hear that relationship has been renewed. And joining us next are Lucy Simpson and Shivani Smith from Perrett Laver, who are going to talk about the importance of diversity on boards, some of the challenges that the sector faces and has faced, and also to tell us about that work with Sport England and others that they've been doing, and perhaps also how some of you can get involved in that. So I think we should have them joining us now-ish.
I think we're here. If others can,
appearing on my screen,
see us.
Hopefully they'll be here in a second. But just to re-emphasize, if those people who had questions that aren't able to be answered in the sessions, if they can either contact speakers directly, or they can use the huddle, the forum on the SGA website, or they can try and contact people through. We've got you'd be able to go over to the exhibitor stands in the main lobby or on the left of your screen, and that way you can get in touch with UK Sport and Sport England. They've both got a number of representatives there who you can have immediate video chats with.
Hello. Just to check, can everyone hear us before we start?
I do seem to have company, which is excellent because I was flying around filling dead air. So Lucy, Shivani, thank you for joining us. And I think we've already eaten into a little bit of your time, so I'll get out of your way and I'll let you crack on with your presentation. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. So first of all, we just wanted to say a massive thank you for having us. It's great to see all the names listed today and know that you're here virtually somewhere. And I think, I guess, as was just mentioned, the overall message that we want to deliver today is one of celebration, the progress that we've seen across the sector. We want to share some musings on the challenges and best practice, and just to urge everyone not to take their foot off the pedal when it comes to delivering on diversity. Great progress has been made, but there's still a lot to be done, and we're very much here to help through our partnership with Sport England and UK Sport where we can. So our the format today, we'll just do some quick introductions, and then Shivani's going to talk about the importance of diversity. I'll touch on some of the challenges we see in terms of making diverse appointments at board level and recommend some ways of overcoming them. Shivani will then highlight a little bit about best practice that we see across other sectors. And then finally, I'll give an overview about our Sport England and UK Sport programme to date, highlighting some of the great success stories that we've had so far. So just quickly, in terms of introductions, we thought we'd tell you a little bit about Perrett Laver for those not familiar. We are a search firm ranked in the top 3 of search firms in the UK, supporting sport, educational, research, healthcare, philanthropic, non-profit and cultural organisations. All of our clients are in some way mission-driven or public-facing. And our board practice, which I lead, is therefore tasked with finding senior leaders and next generation leaders who are motivated to move into our sectors. So the board roles that we work on often not remunerated, but it's very much about matching motivated people with passions that they care about. Very proud to work for Perrett Laver due to the genuine passion and commitment that all our colleagues have for the impact of diversity in our sectors. And I, within Perrett Laver, lead our board practice, as I mentioned, so work with a range of organisations at board level, including Oxfam, UNICEF, a range of universities, museums and sports organisations, and have been privileged to be part of the ongoing Sport England UK Sport programme, alongside colleagues at Perrett Laver, who I should mention at this point, Imogen Sanders, who is known to many of you today, who's very happily just gone on maternity leave at the moment, expecting her first baby, but sends her best to everyone. And I'm also a member of the Perrett Laver EDI team led by Shivani, who I'll hand over to now.
Thanks, Lucy, and hi everyone. Good morning to all of you, and thank you again for inviting us to speak today on something that is really close to our hearts, something that we really passionately believe in terms of diverse leadership, inclusive organizations. So my name is Shivani Smith. I am a consultant within the Global Nonprofit and Social Impact team, also working on the Sport England partnership, but also leading on the EDI work within Perrett Laver. I'm also in and around the charity sector for the last 20 years. I'm a co-chair in a small social justice charity. So the whole point around governance is also personally really close to my heart.
Brilliant. And so I think we're just going to kick off now into the presentation itself, with Shivani starting about just the importance of diversity.
Thanks. So I think it's we're very conscious that we're kind of preaching to the converted here and slightly stating the obvious about why diversity is important. But it and as mentioned earlier, this has been such a big conversation taking place over the past year for sure, but obviously predates that. But we know that it's become a really central conversation at leadership level, and also very conscious that there's a panel later in the day picking up on the theme. So apologies for any repetition that might come up. But what we wanted to do was, again, just kind of cover the main themes around what are those internal and external drivers for diversity right now. The code for sport governance is an obvious one, but also more broadly, media scrutiny is another. Internally, it's about pieces around recruitment, staff motivation and expectations, retention. All of these things are not just in the sports sector, but across so many sectors where there are real drivers for making sure that this is being discussed and then action is being taken. But what really matters is not the conversation, and it's not about the initiatives, but it's the engagement with why and what it means and why it's important and the benefits to not just the organization, but to society, because we are all here because of mission-driven organizations of social purpose. So why are we talking about diversity at all when it is such a self-evident value? Because, yeah, of course, it's about fairness and it's about representation. It's about developing better and healthier organizations, modern and inclusive organizations, and it's about social equity. But I think one of the challenges we would want to put up is it's not just about diversity. The kind of focus on diversity is incomplete without the discussion around inclusion and following on from that, intersectionality. So there's a certain phrase that we like to keep in mind when we're talking about our own EDI work, that diversity is a number, inclusion is a behavior, and equity is the outcome. So whether you're thinking about it from an organizational perspective or societal perspective, those are the kind of things that we like to keep us on track and to keep us honest about what we are actually working towards. So we know that diversity and inclusion work in any organization is so much more than the policies, the programs, the headcounts. So in terms of board diversity, yes, building a diverse board is crucial, but it's not just about representation. That's just the first step. It's not just about who's on your board, but it's about what they are doing, what they are achieving, what that diversity means and looks like in practice. Why is it important? So from an organizational point of view, you know, the amount of work that's being done around these initiatives and issues means that we are now at a point that there's a lot of research and evidence to show how diversity and inclusion manifest in how workplaces are healthier, happier, more successful, whichever way an organization is measuring success, whether it's on the bottom line in the private sector, whether it's impact on beneficiaries in the charitable sector, whether it's recruitment or retention. So there's been massive reports now done by McKinsey and Harvard Business School talking about how organizations do better when they have a better diverse organization across all levels. So there's enough research now to demonstrate that equitable employers in whichever sector outpace their competitors by respecting the needs, perspectives, and potential of all their team members. And that includes board, but it absolutely goes right through the organization, from volunteers to participants, everywhere. So as a result, what we see as recruiters all the time is that diverse and inclusive workplaces are more attractive for candidates that we're trying to get, but also people are more likely to stay and more likely to contribute their best because they feel trusted, they feel committed, and they want to stick around. So for diversity champions at any level, it's a much easier job now to make the business case for investing in diversity and inclusion, to have diverse boards, to have diverse teams. It's a simple case to make, but it's definitely not easy. And we really recognize that whatever size of organization you are, it's hard, long, slow work. It takes a lot of planning. It takes action across the organization. It takes effort, time, patience, and courage to be able to, for want of a better phrase, sometimes speak truth to power, to challenge bad practices, to build or rebuild inclusive organizations that genuinely represent and serve society effectively, which is what we're all trying to do. So whether you're talking at board level with the exec, with the staff, volunteers, athletes, diversity inclusion, unfortunately, means hard, uncomfortable conversations. So as recruiters, we see this all the time. Whoever we're working with, there will inevitably be missteps and misunderstandings. That comes with the territory, but it's all working towards something really positive. We are part of many, many challenging conversations with clients and with candidates around EDI, whether it's talking to clients about what they mean when they ask for a diverse candidate, what they mean when they ask for a diverse list, challenging, calling out bias, and challenging, it's more common than you'd like to believe, the idea that there's a choice between the best candidate and the diverse candidate. It's not a choice, it's complete false dichotomy that we are seeing over and over again. And recently, we've seen, understandably, whether it's board diversity or anywhere else, there's an increased emphasis on ethnic minorities, BAME, and even when you think about the debates around the language, there's still a focus on particular areas of diversity right now, certainly in the last 12 to 18 months. But what we would want to just flag is that that's sometimes coming at the expense of a much broader view of diversity. What we would want to be having conversations with is around a full spectrum. So whether that's LGBTQ, physical or intellectual disabilities, educational, geographic, socioeconomic, lived experience, these are all conversations we're trying to have to make sure that people don't go down a narrow lens and keep the idea of diversity and representation really broad and, ironically, inclusive properly when we have these conversations. So Lucy and I, we're very lucky. We work with mission-driven organizations across sectors, whether that's the UK voluntary sector, sports organizations, international NGOs, and we can see that being well-meaning, which is absolutely universal, only takes you so far. The organization that are making the most progress, and it is progress rather than success, we are all working towards more equitable organizations, and no one can claim to have gotten it right yet. We're all on that journey, and it depends on how many people and how the resource we have and the size of organizations and who's in that leadership team right now. So yes, there are huge conversations to be had around this theme, for whether it's inclusive recruitment, employee support, unconscious bias, and these are debates. Everyone has, it's a very polarizing conversation, even when you think about unconscious bias, what can you do about it? But this takes investment, and we'll definitely return to that later. But and Lucy will be talking about challenges in the sports sector in particular. But it's such a critical piece. And again, I know I'm preaching to the converted, so forgive me, but it's such an obvious and universal area for inclusion to be critical in terms of sports. But what if as an athlete or as a person who wants to participate, you're put off because you don't feel that you can, because you might not feel accepted or supported? And this is whether it's people of all sorts of backgrounds, whether it's prejudice around race, ethnicity, religion, disability, gender, age, all of it. And there's such huge themes where we can see how much work has been done, how much of these conversations are taking place, and how much social impact this has. Because succeeding in sports, we know, gives people with social disadvantage, especially, the confidence to succeed in other areas of life, which then filters through to leadership. So just, I guess, to wrap up on this piece of the presentation, it's not just an internal organizational priority. It's not just about success having a diverse board. It's about what those boards are then doing, about challenging and championing sports bodies in the role that they have to play, about social equities. And we're hearing this from the organizations we talk to all the time. It's not just about the numbers. It's about then what does that mean about participation and access and challenging prejudice and breaking down barriers to get into sports. And this is something that we would really emphasize and echo from all the organizations we work with, that building a diverse board is a first step, and then those people are then able to deal with the challenges in the sports sector. And that's where I'm going to hand over to Lucy.
Thank you so much, Shivani. That was really, really interesting. And I guess now I'll talk a little bit about the sports sector and some of the challenges we see about making board recruitment with an emphasis on diversity. And should just be clear that these are challenges in some cases that we see in other walks of life as well. But we will obviously just be talking about the sports sector today. So I guess just to start with, positive message, we were recently involved with the diversity audit across the sector. So thank you for everyone who was involved in participating in that. We can't reveal the exact numbers today, but can confirm that there has been movement in the right direction since the last audit. So that's great to see. But of course, there's still lots to do. So in terms of the barriers as we see them to building truly representative and inclusive boards, I think we can break these down into 5 main areas. So firstly, something that we hear time and again is the stressed importance of having potential board candidates needing to be part of the sport already, or at least have a very strong existing engagement with the sport in question or the sector more generally. Whilst we fully recognise the importance of mission and values alignment, this is something we feel can be found and tested in candidates without having an existing interaction with the sport. And if you need to have that demonstrable existing knowledge or networks, then this does create a vicious cycle. And particularly if the sports community is not that diverse, or if your demographic doesn't speak to certain underrepresented minority groups, the board will then struggle to attract the breadth and diversity of talent that we know is out there. I hope Swim England won't mind my using them as a positive case study here. We're just finalising the appointment of 2 INEDs with them. And we spoke to so many really interesting, talented individuals from a variety of backgrounds. And some of them had only learnt to swim in recent years due to their cultural, religious backgrounds. And therefore, whilst they'd never connected with swimming or even the sports sector, they each in their own way had a really strong alignment to the positive power of swimming and how it relates to community health and well-being. And that is a really powerful thing to have on a board. So I think the question to all of you is therefore, how much does this interest or involvement in the sport, how much is that needed in the pack that you're going out and the conversations that you're having when thinking about your perfect board members? So that's the first point, and it leads very obviously into the second point, which is around always emphasising a skills-based approach to recruitment. So the reason for this is twofold. Firstly, it's linked to the point just mentioned. It opens the potential candidate pool significantly when thinking more about what a person can offer in terms of their direct skills rather than their motivation or understanding of the sector. It's about thinking about people who can more broadly contribute to strategic vision, people from outside the membership. We have heard some stories about people recruiting directors who they think will give them a less challenging time. And I think, if you really put skills first and from those outside the sector, they may just bring that challenge that might be needed and useful. The second reason that it's important to lead with a skills-based approach to recruitment is just because we have seen a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction in the sector following movements such as Black Lives Matter. We have had some very blunt conversations, with boards and people, not just in the sports sector to be clear, but saying, I want a black person or whatever it might be, and just being very not putting the skills first. And we're absolutely confident that, diverse talent is out there, as Shivani outlined. But, it absolutely must be skills first. What can this person bring? What's the longevity of what they're going to bring to the organisation? And then thinking more, holistically about the diversity that they bring as well. And that's just really important for the long-term sustainability of success at board level. And so again, just think about how adverts and appointment details are perhaps reflecting some of this language. The third point to make is just to be encouraging to be open-minded when analysing CVs for interview. So, if you think about the traditional models of leadership, you might be looking for things like brand recognition, leadership experience, previous board experience. Some people have had different career paths, so just take the time to get to know them, and the more that's invested in these processes at the beginning, the better. And that's the same if people haven't necessarily had board experience before. Be open-minded about this. You could be interviewing someone that might say something that jars about their understanding between the executive and the non-executive, for instance. But I think the challenge to yourself at that point is to say, okay, maybe they don't know that now, but do you feel they have the potential to grow into that role? And with the right support, could they quite quickly pick up what their roles and responsibilities are at board level with the right help? And can your organisation be the one to invest time in their development for the good of the diversity of the sector as a whole? The fourth point is just quite a broad one, and happy to go into it more individually with organisations or in the Q&A, but it's about just making sure you take the necessary time and effort and resource into good recruitment practice. We know that this is already taken very seriously and has come on hugely despite it being a very busy time and difficult time. So I won't labour the top points too much, but it really is just really encouraging people, don't rush, invest in not only financially, but, time as well and resource. And it's about thinking about, where are you advertising? How long are you advertising for? What are you saying in your advert? Who's on your panel? Can you engage other stakeholders in your recruitment process through things like youth panels? Can you do a more traditional search with a long list and a short list? How inclusive are your final interview stages, etc. And just on this point, we are here to help. We'll come on briefly to the Sport England programme at the end. But Perrett Laver are always happy to offer advice on any of this. And just the fifth area to think about in terms of the challenges we see, and Shivani highlighted a little bit about this. It's about thinking about your board once appointments have been made, and if you do bring on people, from underrepresented minority groups, really investing in those people. Challenge yourself to think about what are you doing to support this individual's developments. And it's about thinking about things like who are the people on the board who are the decision makers, and therefore investing in certain people who could perhaps be the leaders and the decision makers of the future. So really investing in training and progression is hugely important. Representation is one thing and hugely welcomed, but really question yourself, who are the people making the decisions, driving the debate, leading the committees and chairing the boards? How welcoming are you being to new people coming on? And just one thing to slightly reflect on is what we've seen a little bit is just assuming that people will come on from underrepresented groups to immediately take on EDI leads on the board. Whilst people may have this background and be very strong in those areas, we have had some feedback from people about being automatically assumed that they might chair an EDI committee or lead on a diversity action plan just because they come from a certain background. So I guess just being a little bit mindful of that and thinking about the diversity of the whole board as a whole. And so I guess the final point is just to urge you all, as I know that you all are, but not to take your finger off the pulse when it comes to EDI, and particularly when we're going through periods of change and difficulty. It is easy to revert to the known and recognisable and a safe pair of hands, but please do continue to drive all the areas that we know you are already. We're absolutely here to help. And I'll just hand over to Shivani now, who's going to make a couple of reflections on some lessons that we've learned from other sectors.
Thanks, Lucy. I'll keep it brief because conscious of time, and we do want to get to any of your questions as well. But just picking up from Lucy's point about having your finger on the pulse, we just wanted to highlight a few relevant trends and themes that we've noted from other sectors, and to ask the question what it might mean for the sports sector. Not everything is transferable, not everything is relevant always, and also very conscious that it varies widely depending on the size and the resource of the organization. It's really great to have all these themes and initiatives, but it only works if you've got the time, capacity and resource to do it at the scale that some organizations do. But the big theme that we're conscious of is that there's a really global direction of travel around diversity, inclusion and accountability, crucially. So it kind of puts you in the frame of what CSR, or corporate social responsibility, was like 20 years ago, where it used to be writing a check to your favorite charity or to get your employees to go and paint a wall in whichever local charity there is. And now it's become like a central pillar of good business, of accountable business. And I think this is where the whole diversity and inclusion thing is going as well. That is becoming much more of a central theme as opposed to trying to do the right thing. It's just becoming strategically crucial. And it impacts all of us. So including recruiters like us, as we were talking about earlier, it's more and more of a discussion at every level, at every kind of recruitment about what are we doing in terms of inclusive recruitment practices. But in terms, and as recruiters, yes, we focus on non-profit organizations, but we work a lot with candidates coming from the private sector as well. So there are cross-sectoral themes and international themes that we're drawing on here. So take what's relevant and by all means abandon what isn't. But it is, there's some key headlines. One is around accountability. So just as an example, Coca-Cola has said that they will withhold fees from law firms that fail to meet minimum diversity requirements. So this is not just the US, but across the global organization. And at least 30% for each new legal case, at least 30% of each of the build associate and partners' time must be from diverse lawyers. Now, like I put diverse deliberately in quotes because it not quite sure what they are referring to. And as we discussed earlier, it could mean a huge range of people. But at least half of that must be from Black lawyers. And that's very much coming from a US focus, given everything that's happening in the past year. But I think it's really interesting that they are putting a monetary value now, and there's like a real imperative for their suppliers to be thinking about that. And that's something as recruiters we are also seeing the kind of questions we get asked all the time when we are pitching for business as well. The other piece is around removing barriers. So one of the specific ones is around educational barriers. Big name businesses and charities in the UK are increasingly looking for talented candidates, regardless of their educational background. We know that there's a massive bias in terms of educational background, both whether you have it or not, but also if you have it, where you went to university, what degree you got. So those are the things which are now being challenged. So big organizations in the corporate sector like Google, Facebook, Apple, IBM, they are reducing their requirements for degree qualification in many of their jobs. Same theme is being picked up in the charity sector, especially in fundraising, where degree level qualification required is being really challenged. And now there's a whole theme about non-graduates welcome. And this links directly into diversity because students from disadvantaged backgrounds, low-income households, care leavers, mature students, disabled students, students from BAME backgrounds, they are all, they have a much lower participation in higher education. So those people are now being, their lack of access to certain opportunities is being addressed by taking away those educational barriers. So that's the thing about educational barriers, and linked to that in some ways is salary transparency. So there's another movement in the charity sector in the UK around Show the Salary, which is again trying to address pay gaps, both in terms of gender and in terms of race. And the campaign argues that not having transparency around salaries disadvantages particularly women, but also in groups that are traditionally disadvantaged through a lack of opportunity, a lack of progression, which means that they are getting paid less, which means if you are judged on the basis of your last salary, you're likely to be paid less than a counterpart who has, for all those other reasons, progressed further and is earning more. So that's another theme which is worth thinking about when you're thinking about recruitment, but also then inclusive recruitment, leading straight on from that. We certainly get asked all the time about these themes emerging around blind recruitment, unconscious bias training, what our recruitment practices are like, how do we look after our candidates, how do we make it accessible, whether it's our materials, our adverts, whether it's thinking about special requirements that people may have to participate. And that's even more pronounced at a time when we are all online. Are we really thinking about how people access online platforms? Is it as easy for people as we think it is? On one hand, it is a massive opening up that you can access people in their own time, in their own way, but equally for people who are visually impaired, for people who have hearing disabilities, how does this work for them? Are we thinking it through? But also inclusive recruitment doesn't just stop once you get the person in, whether it's a substantive role or a volunteering role or a board level. It's also about onboarding, inclusive cultures, progression pathways. What are organizations doing along the entire HR field, and what it means for individuals. And then finally, it's about investment in diversity and inclusion initiatives. So there's a move about turning it into roles, and that shows the resource and that shows the investment. So we're seeing a trend of senior level appointments as well. So Chief Diversity Officer is a job title which wasn't around a few years ago, but now all the big organizations are investing in this. And for example, in the UK, hiring demand for diversity and inclusion related roles surged by 106% last year based on the prior year. So that just gives you a sense of the direction of travel. And that means that the people who are in this field, there's a real war for talent. Because it's a whole new wave of what's called culture first thinking. And that culture is another way of describing diversity, inclusion, how people are feeling when they're working for your organization, whether they want to work for you, how they feel once they're there, what that means at board level, what that means across your organization. And all of that combines, if you're getting it right at board level, to mean genuinely good and impactful governance that has a massive impact on the organization, the sport, and the sector. And that, I think, hopefully segues neatly into the Sport England work that we've been doing. So back to Lucy.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'll just give a brief overview of the programme with Sport England and UK Sport designed to address the lack of diversity at board level in the sector. I know that most of you will be familiar with this work, and indeed there are people here today with members of our network on your boards already, which is just brilliant. However, I think some of you might be less familiar and perhaps not all of you aware of the history of the programme and the successes. So I'll give you a bit of an overview into the history and the purpose of the work and highlight a couple of successful case studies. And so just very quickly like to start with a couple of due thanks as well to Sport England and UK Sport colleagues who have been just invaluable in their initial creation of the concept and consistent commitment to working in partnership with us to deliver the programme. So particular thanks there to Kathy Hughes, Jem Coates, Phil Smith and Chris Grant. So much of the programme's success has been really driven by all their sheer commitment and innovation to the programme. So it started at the beginning of 2019 when we were engaged by Sport England to deliver a programme that was aimed to support the diversity of boards in the sector. We were originally tasked with creating a network of 140 board-ready candidates from different underrepresented minority groups. In October 2019, this was extended to involve UK Sport, bringing the network goal to 160. It was extended again in February 2020 to increase the scope with a real emphasis around candidates from disabled backgrounds, particularly, and was due to be concluded earlier this year, but very pleased to say that it has been extended for another year. The main project deliverables were firstly to build the field of potential candidates, all of whom are from outside of the sector. So, in every way resonate with the benefits of the sector in terms of community building, social mobility, mental and physical health, but haven't they themselves been engaged in the sector in some way in terms of the sort of skills first that I was talking about earlier. We did a skills and diversity matrix, so we tried to create the network very much bearing in mind the particular areas of skills that would be most helpful on sports boards. So alongside building the network, we also hosted a range of events which were designed to support candidates with becoming board ready if they hadn't got that experience already. So some people were very much at the beginning of their non-executive career, or even much earlier in their careers, full stop, and others, were very experienced. And for those earlier in their career, we provided them with training and development. And this was very much alongside a range of partner organisations. So we worked with Birkbeck University, who put together a range of online learning modules. We worked with SRA, who gave a really helpful workshops around the sector and board and what it means to be on the board of a sports organisation. Women on Boards gave great training and development workshops about how you utilise your skills on a board, how you present yourself for interview. And we also had great input from Activity Alignments, Stonewall and Ringing Consulting as well in terms of the identification and mentoring of potential candidates. Once the network was built and we'd given people this training, it's then, and this is ongoing, about sharing potential opportunities with candidates and facilitating introductions and advising funded partner organisations in terms of their own advertising strategies. So this is something that is ongoing and we're always very happy to talk to anyone about this. So just very quickly, we'll go through some of the achievements to date. So there's 194 candidates in the network now. just some headlines: 65% of those identify as BAME, 16% identify as having a disability, as well as every other minority group represented there. We've had 37 appointments, which is just absolutely brilliant, and it's just so great to really see a tangible outcome in terms of our network going through the training program and being appointed to boards. So there's a range of successes there, and very happy to go into some more case studies if helpful. But I think the overall outcome and the positivity that we really see and heard is the ability to inspire, engage a whole cohort of people from outside the sector who, in some cases, admit that they perhaps thought of the sector as elitist and not so welcoming, but who really engage with the really positive power and impact of sport, and in terms of things like enhancing mental and physical health, community engagement, and social mobility. They all recognise they can bring a different perspective at board level and support the sector in thinking about being more diverse and inclusive and engaging in different audiences and what that might look like. And I think another positive has been just slowly combating the myth that the talent isn't out there. There's already 37 amazing appointments and a really inspiring network of other people ready to be placed. So with the support of you all today, it would be great to continue appointing as many of those as possible. And as I said, very, very happy to talk to anyone. We're completely delighted the programme will be continuing from this year, and always happy to chat on that. So I think we'll pause there. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We would very much welcome any additional comments. I know that some have been coming through, so we'll try and pick up as many of those themes as we can.
Fantastic. So I think what we can start doing is pick up on some of those questions. I think those are the points from us. So thanks for listening, I guess.
So I'll try and pick up some of those questions as I go. Just a couple of observations from me, if you don't mind. The first one was a comment that you made, Shivani, about expecting sort of challenging conversations. And for me, that's part of that's half the point of increasing diversity, isn't it? That you're getting in different viewpoints, you're getting in people who are questioning, bringing new perspectives, they're questioning the way perhaps things have always been done. And that's such a useful, that's why better decisions are made. And our institute produced a report a couple of years ago called Conflict and Tension in the Boardroom, whereby a bit of tension is good because you're having those slightly awkward conversations. You're maybe, revisiting assumptions, and what you don't want to do is let it spill over into conflict. But getting that sort of difficult conversation going is really part of the point of improving diversity, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think we also have that same phrase in the charity that I chair, which is about healthy discomfort, and that you won't get good conversations going without it. I think the other point is, before we get to that bit where people are comfortable about being challenging in those organizations and at board level, that's also a piece of work that needs to be done, so that when you are talking about inclusion at board level, when you've got those people, do they feel that they can raise questions? Do they feel that they can challenge? Are they getting the support from other trustees, from the chair, to make sure that there is space for them to bring different perspectives, as opposed to, yes, I'm here now, but now what?
Yeah. And something, Lucy, something that you said, sort of made me take notice as well, and that's maybe being a bit understanding of those candidates which don't have previous board experience. And again, almost by definition, if you want to expand the type of person that you have on your board, you have to understand that you're not going to have someone with 20, 30 years of board experience. That's not why you're getting them. You're getting them for the other things that they bring to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was a question in the chat as well that was about, what more can be done to support people's training and development as well. So I guess just to touch on that, some of the things that we've seen, work well is having a sort of a mentor or a buddy on the board already. And if there's no one obvious from the board, perhaps another board in the sector, someone just to really act as a sound point, can be really powerful and useful. And we listed a range of partner organisations that we've been working with as part of the Sport England programme and the training that we can deliver. So, we'd recommend all of those very highly as well in terms of thinking about the non-executive journey. But you're completely right. It is about just a challenge back to organisations of really to take a bit of leap of faith and really just invest the time. It might take, people talk about it taking a year or so to really get their feet under the table with these roles. But if you've got more established people on the board, perhaps there is an opportunity to take on people without that experience and really offer them the chance to learn by doing. I think we may have just lost Craig, but I don't know. Shivani, are there any of the points that you wanted to pick up on?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of comments around diversity of thought, which absolutely just to echo Lucy's point earlier about people coming onto the board with the expectation that they are representing some sort of EDI perspective because of where they're from, as opposed to recognizing that everyone on the board has different things to contribute. And we had a conversation with a client very recently saying that, yes, we have a visibly diverse board, but we all come from the same educational background. So actually what we want you to do is bring us people who have exactly what the comments are talking about diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, to bring that challenge and to bring that healthy discomfort that you were talking about. So certainly that diversity of thought piece is not so that someone who's on the board is then the spokesperson for every other person who either looks like them or has the same disability as them, but it's more about what different ideas are you bringing? How are you able to challenge, and how are you able to build a more exciting consensus, as opposed to everyone thinking the same because they come from a similar corporate background or similar charity background or a similar sporting background. It really is about making sure that you're testing for that. And just to build on that, if that's okay, there's another question which is asked about the traditional application process can often discriminate against people who do not have a corporate business background. Again, this is something that we would say it's about having creative ideas about what your recruitment process looks like. Sometimes we are asking people, depending on the size of the organization, depending on the technology, but sometimes we are asking people to submit video applications. In the charity that I work with, certainly that's something that we offer, that either you submit a written application or if you prefer a video application. So giving people options. There's also times when you can give very specific questions as opposed to asking for a CV. You just say, these are the key questions that we would like you to answer in relation to the cause or in relation to your skills, so that everyone is a bit more on a level playing field and doesn't disadvantage someone who has years of building and creating the perfect CV, but maybe doesn't have the relevant skills. So there are ways of, if you're brave enough to throw out traditional processes, there's definitely ways to get more exciting ways of assessing people.
And I saw a question as well. People were talking about boards being non-remunerated and voluntary, and the limits that has. And certainly it's something we see. And on the very extreme end of that, you can consider perhaps paying at least the chairs or committee chairs and something to reflect on. But I guess there are other ways of making these opportunities more accessible to people who are perhaps still very much in the thick of their executive career. So I guess one area that perhaps could be reflected on is everything's been happening virtually for the last year, and actually the life has continued. It's all moved on, and we've had feedback from a lot of people that it's meant that they're far more able to partake in being on a board alongside their careers. So I guess just an openness going forward to doing things virtually might make these roles more accessible to people. And you can also think about paying for loss of earnings as well as kind of a further step on from covering expenses as well. So that I appreciate that it all does have a monetary attachment, but definitely the point stands that the pool is widened, and it is a challenge in terms of the fact that the roles are generally speaking unremunerated.
I think there's another question which came up about where does age discrimination come in, and it's often ignored, and agree that there tends to be a quite narrow focus sometimes about what diversity needs, and age discrimination can come in obviously the two forms about discriminating against younger people or against older people, and we see both, unfortunately. And I think it is one of those things about when we talked about blind recruitment earlier, often that's about names, but when you think about it more deeply, if you take out the pieces around years of experience or educational background, or for example, if someone sees O levels on a CV, they might immediately come up with certain biases and perceptions about what that means and what value someone might bring to a board. So it's really about testing each assumption that we make along the whole recruitment process, each requirement that we put in. So we were talking to one client recently where they were looking for a CEO, and one of their requirements was an MBA, and we challenged, is that really a requirement to be a CEO? And they actually agreed that it wasn't, because they were the CEO and they didn't have an MBA. So I think it's also about being able to challenge and to think about what are the implicit messages as well as the explicit messages. So what we do when we're putting out job adverts is not so much from an age point of view, but we do put each advert through a tool which looks for gender-based language, but also when you think about what other language you're using, which implicitly or explicitly discriminates against. So if you ask for someone with 15 years of experience, you're sending a very strong message that younger trustees need not apply. So I think it's just being really conscious about what messages you're putting out and how it reads, and getting a few people to sense check how it reads across is always a good way to challenge that.
I think time has caught us there, Shivani and Lucy. Thank you so much. I can see from all the comments just how much everybody's has got out of that presentation. It's obviously something that's at the forefront of people's minds, and rightly so. And just to pick up very quickly on a comment that Jackie made about having a network available for people who are new, perhaps to board roles. On the SGA website, there is an online forum. It's called The Huddle, and there's a group in there that's called New to Sports Governance. It's not the most heavily populated group at the moment, but perhaps that is something that that we can build up. So please feel free to go over there, and it will also put you in the sort of same environment as all the supporting material that people experienced and new to boards might use. So I think there's something that we can all do as a sector in terms of helping progress people who want to break into board roles or governance roles more generally. So I think we've all got a part to play in that. The SGA is part of that. The work that Perrett Laver and their partners on the project are also doing is also part of that. So Lucy, Shivani, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your presentation. Thanks for your help. And I think we're going to go into a break now. Everybody's earned that. So please feel free, everybody, to go off, make a brew, stretch your legs, maybe connect with each other, catch up on some of the questions that have been coming in the chat. And if you want to answer each other directly through the messaging on the platform, then I'm sure that will go down really well. But thank you, everybody, for your attention so far. And I will see everybody at, if I check my agenda, 11:30. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Lucy and Shivani. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All the best.